Today, we're talking about the long and interesting history of X-Force. So, buckle up because it's an interesting one. The story of X-Force really starts with the New Mutants. The idea behind that series was to focus on the next generation of mutants that Xavier started training when he thought that his X-Men were KIA. It was around this time that the New Mutant comic sales started to kind of fall off. What the team needed was a resurgence and a reinvigoration. While the X-Men and the New Mutants mainly focused on young, fairly innocent mutants who were pretty goody two-shoes, with the introduction of Rob Liefeld as the new writer for New Mutants, he began to make the team much more hardcore and darker, as all evidence from stories of that time prove that that's what readers actually wanted. And one of the ways he decided to do that was by introducing the character of Cable. Now later we would learn that Cable, this badass mysterious mutant cyborg, was actually the child of Scott Summers and the clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor. When he was born, he was immediately sent to the future by his parents because they feared that if he stayed, Apocalypse would hunt him down because Apocalypse feared that Cable would be the mutant responsible for bringing him down for good. That doesn't really matter, but there you go. So following the introduction of Cable, who showed up in the New Mutants 87 from the future, he basically began to radicalize these young New Mutants, and over the course of the last few issues of New Mutants, the team that would become X-Force started to form. Around this time, we were also introduced to even more characters who would go on to eventually join X-Force, or at least take part in the X-Force stories. Mutants like Domino, Feral, Deadpool, who was actually an X-Force villain for a long time, Shatterstar, and Copycat. The New Mutants came to a final end with issue 100, with the mutants Warpath, Cannonball, Boom Boom, Shatterstar, Feral, and Domino coming together under Cable in 1991 when X-Force #1 finally debuted. Now this new X title hit pretty hard. It was incredibly popular, bringing X-Force to the forefront. At the same time, the team's creator, Rob Liefeld, was pretty annoyed that he didn't own the characters he created and that he wasn't being given royalties for the action figures and merchandise that were made using his designs. So, he left Marvel entirely around issue 12 of X-Force, leaving the writing of X-Force to a guy named Fabian Nicieza, who tried to carry on what Rob had started while also toning down the huge character designs and other extreme aspects that Rob was criticized for. While the X-Men and X-Factor were mostly dedicated to peaceful coexistence between mutants and humanity and typically only stepped in to battle their enemies after those enemies had caused trouble, under Cable, this new team became essentially a Minority Report kind of Black Ops strike force, setting out to attack anti-mutant targets to prevent future casualties foreseen by Cable since he's from the future. And they did it pretty ruthlessly too. That, mixed with the fact that Cable's super powerful clone, a guy who went by the name Strife, began impersonating Cable and started committing all these horrible crimes, including trying to take out Professor X during the Executioner's Song crossover event between X-Force, X-Men, and X-Factor, the team got labeled as extremists by the wider Marvel Universe at the time, with S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to bring them down for their perceived threat to humanity, and the X-Men trying to bring the team down in order to protect and redeem their fellow mutants. Now during the climax of Executioner's Song, Cable and the X-Men defeated Strife, but both Cable and his clone were sucked into a portal, leading the heroes to believe both were now deceased. As a result, Cannonball took over as the leader of X-Force, but they were now left on the run and fighting other heroes who deemed them too extreme, which is when they fought War Machine. With Cable gone, X-Force almost got taken back into the X-Men landscape, but instead, X-Force said, hey, we ain't kids no more, and they actually broke off from the X-Men and tried to find their own definitive identity. About 7 issues after Cable had gone into the time stream portal, he returned again just in time for the X event Fatal Attractions. This is the story where Magneto threatened all of humanity and took up base in the spaceship that used to be used by Cable himself. This is the story where Magneto ripped out the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton. Now, while Cable was the leader and mission giver for X-Force before, now the team had fleshed themselves out to the point that they decided that Cable can be a part of the team, but they weren't going to be following him as if he was just another version of Xavier. From this point, X-Force began to be a little less popular as its storylines began to become a lot more soap opera-like. But don't think that means they were bad, they just didn't have anything crazy happen and fell off in popularity, and then the Age of Apocalypse event took place, which basically put X-Force on a bit of a break. It was after Age of Apocalypse that X-Force was handed over to Jeff Loeb to try and take them in a new direction. Cannonball left the team and joined the X-Men proper, and the team gained new costumes that honestly just looked like different colored X-Men costumes. And they also moved into the X-Mansion alongside the X-Men, which is a little odd. We also got more about the origin of Shatterstar and a lot more primarily character-driven stories. Eventually, the book was taken over by John Francis Moore, and the team even eventually stepped away from the X-Men and Cable and went road tripping, winding up in San Francisco. But this still didn't really do the trick for X-Force sales, and it was actually all of the X titles that were suffering, so Marvel decided to try and counter this with X-Men Revolution, bringing back the X-Men superstar writer Chris Claremont to breathe some kind of new life into the Marvel X-Men universe. As Claremont took on both X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, Warren Ellis was brought on to Captain X-Force, X-Man, and Generation X. These three titles became more intertwined and fell under the Counter X moniker. The X-Force characters were mostly returned to their roots as they became a Black Ops squad commanded by Pete Wisdom. Unfortunately, it wasn't too long after this in 2000 that X-Force was cancelled, but then revived in a bold, weird new way, with Peter Milligan writing a new X-Force team following the apparent death of all the previous X-Force members. This new group were now a team of fame-hungry reality TV celebrities. This version of X-Force was wild, and this is also where we got the introduction of Dupe and saw X-Force team members come and go from the team and from life itself at an alarmingly frequent rate. Unfortunately, it still didn't help sales, and that series was cancelled and rebranded as X-Statix. X-Force finally came back for Volume 2 in 2004 when Marvel reunited the original X-Force creative team on a 6-issue miniseries that returned the team back to their 90s nostalgia, which made it popular among readers. Rob Liefeld came back to draw and plot the book while Fabian Nicieza handled the final scripts. This new X-Force was once again led by Cable and included members like Shatterstar and Domino. The series also resurrected Strife and the Mutant Liberation Front, and the nostalgia of the whole thing really got the book popular with fans, but unfortunately, because Liefeld recycled a number of pages from unpublished Marvel work, it resulted in a very disjointed story, and this was only a brief return of X-Force before the team went dormant again for a little while. The real hard return of X-Force came in early 2008, following the conclusion of the Messiah War crossover under writers Craig Kyle and Chris Yost. At this point in time, Cyclops had taken over the X-Men and moved them to San Francisco. He spearheaded a new version of X-Force as a new Black Ops team to protect the dwindling mutant race from its most dangerous foes and to recover the baby mutant Hope Summers, who was being protected by Cable. The team included a mix of classic X-Force characters like Warpath, Wolfsbane, Domino, and eventually Cable again, but with new additions like X-23, Elixir, and Archangel, and they were led by Wolverine, and it was so dope. The characters donned stealthy black and gray versions of their uniforms and were encouraged to carry out missions with lethal force, and they absolutely did. This team's main villain came in the form of the hybrid Sentinel known as Bastion, who plotted to wipe out the world's last remaining mutants. The fight with Bastion culminated in the franchise-wide crossover Second Coming, after which this incarnation of X-Force kind of disbanded. But that team and book was the most successful revival of X-Force that Marvel had tried, and so, in 2010, only a few months after Second Coming, they were brought back with Uncanny X-Force. This time, only Archangel returned from the previous group's new additions, but Psylocke, Deadpool, and Phantom X were brought on to round out the squad. And again, it was dope. Early conflict centered around the team's efforts to halt the return of Apocalypse, and then following Schism, they were mainly safeguarding the students of the Jean Grey School against the new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. This was a huge success, and Uncanny X-Force got a second volume in 2013, now being led by Psylocke and Storm, and getting curious new members like Puck, Spiral, and Cluster facing off against former X-Man Bishop. Following this, in 2014, we got yet another X-Force book under the Marvel Now imprint, following a team composed of Cable, Phantom X, Psylocke, Marrow, and eventually Dr. Nemesis. They came together following the Alexandria incident, an event during which more than 3,000 people passed away at a defense symposium. The public believed that a mutant was responsible, and Cable decided to take his team to get to the bottom of it before things really hit the fan. Because all of that still wasn't enough though, we also got Cable and the X-Force. This followed the fallout of Avengers X-Sanction and Avengers vs. X-Men. Cable has been cured of the techno-organic virus, but the result is that his body is dying and he starts having visions of dark future events. So this new X-Force is composed of mutant fugitives like Colossus, Forge, and Domino, and their goal is to use Cable's knowledge of the future to prevent his premonitions from coming true, just like in the 90s. But their actions bring them into conflict with both the X-Men and the Avengers. Now moving into the modern day, we had one X-Force team which was an outlaw group led by a younger version of Cable facing off against the anti-mutant cyborg Ahab, traveling around time and rescuing mutants where they could. But now that the mutants have moved themselves over to Krakoa, they set up another version of X-Force which established itself as basically Krakoa's intelligence agency led by Beast, who was supervised by Jean Grey and assisted by Sage. X-Force ran special operations sanctioned to employ lethal force, and the ground team was led by Wolverine and had agents like Domino, Kid Omega, Black Tom Cassidy, Colossus, X-23, Omega Red, and a lot of the former members of X-Force from over the years. They took up base in the Point and had Forge as their version of like James Bond's Q. They mainly faced off against the anti-mutant organization called Xeno, and unfortunately, in more recent years, Beast had gone completely off the rocker and has essentially become a villain, while X-Force still operated as a security and intelligence agency of Krakoa. But that's really all the time I've got left. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I'll catch you nerds on the flippy flop, but until then, stay safe and peace out, you nerds.